I stumbled upon the term metonymy on Silver Rhetorica, an online archive of rhetorical terms that have, for the most part, been long forgotten. Many of them have been so rarely used and difficult to articulate that I couldn't even make sense of their definitions. But metonymy wasn't one of those terms. I understand exactly what constitutes a metonymy. In fact, I'm sure that most are familiar with the figure of speech without even knowing that there's a term for it at all. In its most basic definition, a metonymy is a figure of speech where one part of someone or something, usually the most defining attribute, is used to represent the whole. For example, someone might tell a friend to check out their new wheels after they got their first car. A newscaster might use the White House when referring to the president or his administration. Once I learned the term for this figure of speech, I began to recognize it in scholarship, in literature, and in regular conversation. What's more is that I noticed that all of the parts used to represent each whole were mutually agreed upon and understood by every person involved. I found that the metonymy has become such a component of our everyday language that, while the figure of speech is generally understood, we don't see its rhetorical effect as particularly revolutionary. It's just that, a figure of speech. However, I don't believe that metonymy should be placed inside a box of written and spoken language. In fact, they exist in several different forms. Here, I want to focus on sonic metonymies. I was drawn to the concept of sonic metonymy because of a term that I learned in my first film class. That term is diegetic sound, which refers to the sonic motifs that originate outside of immediate focus. In his paper about metonymy and audiovisual discourse, Forceful states that diegetic sound is meant to make an audience aware of what takes place out of visual range. The sound, then, can be considered the part, while the whole is what the audience understands to be happening off-screen. This is the sonic metonymy. To illustrate this concept, I've chosen a single sonic motif which is present in a considerable number of sound and film productions, and I've chosen to refer to it as the squeak. The squeak has been used across various forms of media to represent an array of different subjects, actions, and feelings. Though the sound is often fleeting when it occurs, there's something profound about the way we have come to understand it. All squeaks are inherently different. The length, pitch, and volume of one squeak is specific to its origin, and another source could likely not match that squeak naturally. Despite this, an audience is more often than not able to identify the source of the squeak at first encounter. Listen to this squeak. Can you tell what's producing that sound? Is it familiar? Of course it is. It's a squeak that many of us have experienced, a swing set. Try this one. What is it? This one is easy. These squeaks are distinct, and it doesn't take a close listening to name the whole or the source from which the part, the sound, came. The metonymy, however, doesn't end here. Thomas Rickert, author and rhetoric scholar, discusses his concept called ambient sound in his book titled Ambient Rhetoric, The Attunements of Rhetorical Being. He notes that ambience refers to the active role that the material and informational environment takes in marrying human doing and passive material to create meaning. Listen to this squeak again. We understand the whole to be a swing set. However, the squeak represents more than just a mere object. Does a swing set produce a squeak if nobody's on the swing? This sound represents a swing, but it also represents an action, swinging. It represents a human who is performing that action. It's suggestive of a place. Consider this one. We know the song to belong to a toy, but we know that a toy doesn't produce a squeak without a squeeze, and a squeeze must come from an actor. In this case, the squeak not only represents an action and an actor, but a type of actor, a certain category of being. While one thinks of a child playing, I may think of a dog chewing. In both of these cases, we're able to make these assumptions without needing to actually see the squeak to occur. Ambience, then, could be considered synonymous with diegetic sound. It facilitates our ongoing perceptions and understandings of the world. Rickert describes it as of the earth, being that which materializes around us, surrounds us, and communicates something. But how did we come to understand these squeaks? That became a big question. If the sonic metonymy is ambient sound in its varying forms, is universally agreed to represent different objects and actions, how are we able to develop that depth of consciousness? Rhetoric scholar Krista Ratcliffe might attribute this to a concept she calls rhetorical listening. She defines this term, rhetorical listening, as a trope for interpretive invention. This stance of openness, she says, allows us to form conscious identifications in ways that promote productive communication. This concept suggests that, sometime throughout our lifetimes of listening, we reach a point at which we are able to identify without seeing, to invent by merely listening. Ratcliffe's idea corresponds with Rickard's experience with ambient sound, which he describes as a nonlinear, dynamic process of emergence. Our exposure to the squeak echoes his exploration. Whether we're aware of it or not, we are constantly engaging in this rhetorical process of invention through listening. The squeak is a prominent example, but sonic metonymies are on all sides of us. This cycle of hearing and extracting is incessant, even in our most mundane moments. There's always a whole, and we are always being made aware of its parts.